In this guest presentation, I answer the question, what does a costume craft artisan do? Hi, my name is Rachel Pollock. I work as the crafts artisan at Playmakers Repertory Company, and I'm a lecturer in the UNC Costume Production MFA program at Chapel Hill. What does it mean to be a costume crafts artisan? First, let's take a look at the structure of the costume department. I like to think of it as two teams that work together, the costume design team and the costume production team. The costume design team is responsible for making the aesthetic choices. They choose the color palette, they choose the fabrics the costumes will be made from, they choose what silhouettes those costumes will impart to the performers, and they express that design through illustrations. They might be renderings by hand or by Photoshop. And they also compile research Bibles to back up their designs and communicate more clearly with the costume production team. Those folks are responsible for interpreting the design team's artistic direction and turning those costume renderings and research into physical garments that can be worn by the performer. Our development team at the theater I work at likes to call that bringing the costumes from the page to the stage. Here is a slide about what the actual responsibilities of a crafts artisan are, because I am not a pattern maker, a stitcher, a tailor. I don't create full garments. Instead, I'm responsible for these 4 areas of costume items. I'm in charge of all the accessories. That can be shoes or belts or handbags. I either refurbish those or alter those, or sometimes I make them from scratch. If this play has any masks or armor in it, I'm responsible for those, either making them, altering them, refurbishing them, etc. If the play has any hats, the name for that craft is millinery, and at the theater where I work, I do all of the millinery or oversee people who are assisting me. But sometimes a milliner is a totally separate position. For example, at the Santa Fe Opera, they have a team of milliners who do nothing but make hats and a team of crafts artisans who do other types of things like masks, armor, sword belts, etc. And the last area of focus is dyeing fabrics and surface design on those fabrics and costumes. That can include premature aging and making a piece look old. We call it distressing sometimes. And I want to note that sometimes this responsibility is a whole separate position, a dyer painter. There are 3 areas that it's important to note a crafts artisan is not responsible for. The first of these is makeup design or application. The reason for that is that's a whole area of specialty in and of itself. And often in many states, makeup application needs to be done by somebody with a cosmetology license. Now, I have often collaborated with special effects makeup designers on shows for our theater where I will life cast the face of the performer and send that cast to the special effects artist to then sculpt what the appliances are going to be if we're going to have silicone scars or gills or whatever. Wigs and hair design or hair styling is another area that a crafts artisan does not do that. Sometimes I will make what is essentially a hat, but it gives the impression of a hairstyle. Think about drag queen wigs made out of craft foam or yarn and things of that nature. I, as a crafts artisan, will do those projects because it's basically millinery. But when it comes to making a hand-tied lace front wig, a wig maker has special training in that, and you can get a graduate degree in it if you like. And with hair styling or cutting, that's another area where you need a cosmetology license to perform that in every state that I know of. The third area that a crafts artisan is not responsible is flying techniques and effects. If you're going to fly a performer on stage, they need a special harness that is certified for safety. It's physically possible for me to build a harness that someone can get hoisted in, but I am not certified to do that safely. And those harnesses exist. You can buy them. There are whole companies out there that specialize in only flying effects. They have special insurance policies for liability if anyone gets injured. And because they do it all the time, people rarely get injured because they know what the hazards are. So anytime I have been asked to create any kind of flying harness, I always insist that we hire a specialist for that, because I, as the crafts artisan, am not going to be legally responsible for someone getting injured because what I created was not safe. Sometimes a crafts artisan is responsible for these areas, but not always, and I'll explain why. So, body padding, other reshaping projects, like you have a character whose leg gets amputated in the second act, so you need a false peg leg for them. Say an actor is playing a supernatural being and needs wings. Sometimes I will make those. Sometimes the draper will make those, especially body padding, like if a character needs to become progressively more pregnant over the course of a show. At our theater, often the draper will create that pregnancy pad because they are also creating garments that go over it. Sometimes I create puppets, either one person regular hand puppets or macro puppets, by which I mean a mechanism that is so large that it needs more than one person to operate it. Think about the horses in War Horse. And sometimes I also will be responsible for crossover items that it's questionable as to whether it would be a prop or a costume. For example, perhaps props is supplying the swords for a show, and I am responsible for the sword belts or the scabbards in which those swords are carried. Now let's look at some examples of each of the four major areas of responsibility. And first, we're going to show you some accessories. Specifically, I have some images of a shoe project and a parasol project that I did for the main stage at the theater where I work. It's worth noting, with respect to shoes, most of the work that I do involves rubberizing shoe soles for safety, because Actors Equity, the union for performers, requires that of all footwear, that they have a rubber sole. Sometimes, though, I also will alter an existing shoe to create a more accurate period shape. I personally don't make shoes from scratch. If we need a totally custom made shoe, we send that out to a special shop like DeLuca's. And at our theater, at least, I often will restore and recover parasols instead of leaving those to the props department, because the costume designer wants those to usually match the costume in some way. They want to see them in the costume fitting rather than leaving it to the scenic designer who's picking out the rest of the props. Here's a pair of shoes that I recovered to match the dress that the performer was wearing. If you look at the shoe on the left, I've removed the sole there, and the fabric that has been applied to the top and slip stitched around the opening for the foot has been pulled underneath the sole of the shoe and corset stitched to hold it in place so that it's very sleek and stabilized for that sole to go back on. The next thing that happens to that shoe on the left to make it finished like the shoe on the right is there's a separate piece that covers that heel you can see, and then the heel cap goes on to finish it off. These are two parasols that I restored and recovered with the help of an assistant for a production some years ago. And in this case, the costume designer chose these two different antique frames that did not have cover fabric on them that matched what she had designed, and she asked us to recover them using fabrics that matched the dresses of the women who were carrying them. On the left there is a cross-woven silk dupioni in red and black, and in the center is two different styles of silk taffeta pieced to create that border stripe. And you can see that one in the stage shot with the performer who carried it on the right. Let's talk about masks and armor. So to make a mask, you need to have sculpting skills and casting skills in a variety of different media. When you make armor for the stage, that includes leather working, sometimes vacuum forming, working with thermoplastics, and increasingly needs 3D scanning and printing capabilities and CDC technologies like laser cutters. It's worth noting that masks and armor should be made in close communication with the performer and the movement coach, because whatever that actor is blocked to do in the scene, the armor needs to accommodate that action, whether it is dance or fight choreography or some other type of action. And performer safety has to take priority over everything else. Here's an example of a set of masquerade masks that I made for a show 2 seasons ago, in which we had 12 different masks that each had to be a different animal. And on the right, you see a sculpture of a fox face. That's called a matrix, over which I formed thermoplastic to create several of the styles of masks. For this set of masks, I had 4 different matrix sculptures, of which this fox is only one. And if you look at the picture, the mask carried by the gentleman on the right is made on this fox mask matrix. But the rabbit in the center is made on a completely different sculpture, and you can tell the difference in the shapes of the cheekbones and the forehead and the eyebrow area, that those are not made on the same base sculpture. Millinery is one of my favorite areas of work. I've been making millinery since 1993, and I did spend a short period of time as a pattern drafter for a fashion brand, creating a set of cut and sew hat patterns to be sent to a factory for manufacture. Here's an example of a hat that was made for a stage show. On the rendering, you can see this straw hat worn by the character. And on the right is a stage shot of the performer. This is a gentleman named Ray Dooley in a female role as Mrs. Jennings. And Ray is wearing the straw hat that I made based on this rendering. Dyeing and fabric effects. I've run the dye shop at the American Repertory Theater in Cambridge, Massachusetts for 4 years, and I substituted in as an emergency dyer at the Los Angeles Opera when the woman who normally ran the dye shop was ill for a week. In the summer of 2016, I ran the dye shop at the Broadway Costume House Parsons Mears while they interviewed prospective dyers after their staff dyer unexpectedly quit. This image shows an example of how many dye projects can come through a theatrical dye shop, and you would never know it to look at the costumes on the stage. This is from the show Peter and the Starcatcher, in which the company of sailors turn into drag queen mermaids for one number. And in this case, we were making these trumpet gowns in 4 different colorways: red, fuchsia, orange, and yellow. And I had to dye several components to match each gown color in order for the draper and the stitchers to assemble the costumes. These dresses had matching hem tape, boning channel tape, zippers, horsehair braid, lining fabric, and petticoat net. Plus, I had to dye the opera gloves to be the same color as the wigs. An ordinary person watching this show would have no idea how much work I put in as a dyer on these looks before they ever even got assembled into a costume. Collaboration is very important as a crafts artisan. I work most closely with drapers in the costume shop and prop builders. Sometimes I even work with the scenic artist to get paint chips for elements of the set that are supposed to match a costume. It's worth noting that workplace safety is very important to a costume crafts artisan. I am committed to safe work practices and learning how to use all the materials and media in our shop safely. I consult safety data sheets issued by the manufacturers. I speak with the Environmental Health and Safety Department on campus to find out how to best protect myself and my coworkers from any hazards that those substances might pose. Like, for example, barge cement, which gives off a fume that has been proven to be carcinogenic and mutagenic, hence the respirator. If you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and hit the bell for notifications of new content. Please join me every Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern for my live studio stream.